What if Godzilla existed in Pokemon? How do we make this happen? Well, we can't. There's not really a way to mod Showdown to where you can add something completely new. To be honest, I wouldn't even want that, because I feel like Godzilla kinda... not even sure if I would be satisfied with a certain type for him. But we could do the best next thing, and that's theorizing, changing some Pokemon, adjusting their levels, types, and moves, and we just need a little bit of creativity. So that's why I have made this team here, which consists of 7 Pokemon, all of which are named after Pokemon from the Godzilla series, and have been edited and changed when it comes to their abilities, their stats, etc. They perfectly represent the Pokemon, or the kaiju they're based off of. Starting off with the Big G himself, obviously, using Excalibur to represent Godzilla was always obvious, I would say. It's literally based off Godzilla, and for those of you who don't know, its signature move is actually a reference to Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, where Godzilla is trying to catch Ghidorah, who's flying in the air. So Godzilla literally takes his atomic breath and breathes on the ground so he can propel himself and start flying. That's where the animation has Excalibur firing his breath and trying to hit with his dorsal fin in the back. So this is Godzilla. And obviously, considering Godzilla is super strong and super bulky, his stats are maxed out. Not only that, but his level was changed to 154, as a reference to the year he came out in, 1954. That's also the same reason why Excalibur evolves at level 54 as well, in case you didn't know. Now technically, Excalibur and even Godzilla's speed isn't really that bad. If you actually look at Godzilla in the different various medias, he's surprisingly really quick, being able to catch jets, fight other monsters, run, etc. But I felt like it would have been a little too OP if, with the added stats, he also just blitzed everything. So that's why I gave him 0 IVs. So, it's whatever. Now, the reason for these 4 moves all have a specific purpose and are a reference to Godzilla. First and foremost, Dragon Pulse. Now, I'm sure most people would have just gone with Flamethrower. However, Flamethrower would have been a really inaccurate move, because Godzilla doesn't breathe fire. He breathes an atomic breath that's so radioactive, it literally destroys things on the atomic level. So, simply just breathing fire does not represent it at all. But it's tricky, because I prefer if there was a poison move that I can use to represent it. And that's also why Excalibur here has Terra Poison, because at the start of the match, I immediately turned into that. Because if Godzilla were to be a type, I know everyone always says Water Dragon, but the radioactive parts of Godzilla are more so the parts that define his character. His entire thing is being a metaphor for nuclear destruction. So there's really no reason for me to assume Godzilla will be anything other than poison. Maybe water poison, but not dragon. He would not be like the same type as, like, let's say Ghidorah, for example. I really wish I could have given him Flash Fire and Lightning Rod as well, because both of those are also abilities that Godzilla has. Because Godzilla, along with being able to absorb radiation, he's just able to absorb energy in general. He was able to kill Tiamat and take, like, her base, which has a lot of, like, solar flares, or getting energy from solar flares, basically. Multiple movies shows Godzilla absorbing electricity and lightning. So, I can't add all of it. So instead, he was given Toxic Chain. Which, for those of you who don't know, Toxic Chain is a move where if you make physical contact with the opponent, or they make physical contact with you, you can poison them. It's a 30% chance to badly poison them as toxic. And the idea is, Godzilla is so radioactive that everything that gets near it is in danger of being poisoned. So that's why I have a whole bunch of poisony things going on with Excalibur here. And Dragon Pulse is the most accurate move I can probably give him, because Dragon Pulse is mostly just a big beam of energy. So that alone is probably the most accurate thing for the Atomic Breath. But as a bonus, Godzilla also has a Nuclear Pulse. When Godzilla uses the Nuclear Pulse, basically radiation or just power surges from all angles of his body. So most of the time it's used defensively. Like for example, in 1991's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, King Ghidorah was really hurting Godzilla, so he used the Nuclear Pulse to try to back him off. In the 2019 film, after he gets amped by absorbing Mothra, as opposed to Nuke putting him on nuclear overload, he just passively has a whole bunch of radiation surge all throughout his body, which absolutely demolished Ghidorah. So having a Dragon Pulse with Pulse in the name, by coincidence, just helps out a lot. He was also given Strength, because Godzilla has shown time and time again that he is, well, as you can probably guess, really strong. Like in the manga, he whips the 240,000 ton Biollante, he whips the 140,000 ton Mechagodzilla in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. Monsterverse constantly shows him throwing hands at people, and even lifting and throwing Kong with just his mouth. So strength is obvious. Same with dive, because Godzilla is aquatic. You might not see it in all of the designs outside of Monsterverse, but all versions of Godzilla do have gills. In fact, Godzilla's even better and faster in the water than he is on land. Unfortunately though, for most of Godzilla's history with animation, while really cool, does have some limitations with water. Which is why you almost always only see him traveling the water. You never really see him having fights. He does have some, however. Like in the Showa era, with Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, he has some few underwater fights with Ebra, but they weren't really that good, since they're mostly really dark and a hard time seeing what's going on. In 1992's Mothra vs. Godzilla, Godzilla vs. Mothra, and Batship Battle for Earth. In that one, there's a short fight with Godzilla and Batra Larva, where they're fighting in the ocean, but since it's the Heisei era, which is infamous for mostly having beam fights and not really any physical stuff, there wasn't really that much going on. The only sort of interesting thing that happens is when Godzilla whips up Batra, slams them onto the sea floor, which actually causes a bit of an earthquake, which splits the earth open, where both gonna fall inside. Godzilla later emerges from a volcano, and Batra emerges in the middle of the ocean. So Godzilla, or Excalibur here, having dive is pretty self-explanatory. I considered giving him surf, since in the 2014 film, when Godzilla emerges, it kind of causes a small tsunami. But I decided to go with explosion instead, because in one of the films, Godzilla vs. Destroyer, the finale of the Heisei era, burning Godzilla, like basically he absorbed the explosion from the island he was on, Birth Island. But the issue is that he was put in nuclear overload. So there was a real danger that Godzilla was going to explode and literally destroy the planet. So that's why I decided to give him explosion. It's also kind of a reference to the nuclear pulse, like I mentioned earlier. Just having a big explosion that goes over like all corners of his body. I'm not sure how good it really is. Doesn't really matter too much, since this is not really a video about going over how balanced something would be. Just trying to be as accurate as possible. So this is Godzilla's moveset, and I'm really proud of it. Next up we have Mothra. There's a lot of bugs, and a lot of butterflies and moths in Pokemon, and I'm sure Volcarona would have been most people's first choice, but I decided to go with Venomoth, since I feel like Venomoth is the one that looks the most like, at least GMK Mothra, since this one has a much more, much less fluffy design, and as you can probably tell just from seeing it, this one's also famous for having purple eyes, which is unusual since most versions of Mothra have blue eyes. The level is 1964, which technically I think I got that wrong. That's the same year as Mothra vs. Godzilla, as well as Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. We'll get to those in a little bit, but that's not the year Mothra came out. The original Mothra film, and yes, for those who don't know, Mothra was originally starring in her own film before being in the Godzilla franchise. And even after that, she had, after the Heisei series, had 3 extra films called Rebirth of Mothra, as well as Rebirth of Mothra 2 and Rebirth of Mothra 3. They're kids' films for the most part, but still pretty cool that she has, her own films. But Mothra, the original, which came out after Godzilla Rates Again, came out in 1961. So that's where it should be. So I'll change it right now. For those of you who don't know, this is how you can change the levels of Pokemon custom games. My computer's lagging right now. Okay, there we go. 1961. A little bit more accurate. As for the moveset, now the babies, the Mothra larvae, always shoot their strings, so obviously String Shot would seem like an obvious choice. But if I wanted to do that, I would have done Caterpie. Luckily though, in the later MonsterVerse films, Mothra, even as an adult, still has her silk, so she uses that to trap Ghidorah, as well as some other Titan in the new Godzilla X Kong movie. So String Shot, I kept. Just is because Mothra often will use winds to try to fight her enemies, especially with her first match with Godzilla. At the end of her match with Godzilla and Mothra vs. Godzilla, 1964, she kept on trying to flap her wings to blow Godzilla away, but unfortunately, Mothra was dying. So she used her last resort. Her last resort is, when all Mothras are about to die, they have a poison that they can sort of spread from their scales or wings, whatever. It's kind of confusing, but she has a powder which she tried to use to poison Godzilla. That's the reason why we have poison powder on here. And the reason for Mirror Coat is because in later versions of Mothra, that same poison can also be used to deflect beam attacks. So in Godzilla vs. Unleashed, I'm pretty sure if you try using the poison, not only does it drain the opponent's HP dramatically, but if I remember correctly, if you try to use any range attacks or atomic breath or whatever, it either blocks it or actually deflects it. And I'm pretty sure the same thing happens in 2003's Godzilla Tokyo SOS, as well as Godzilla Final Wars, which came out in 2004. So that's Mothra's moveset here. I consider giving it Flame Body, because in Godzilla Final Wars, when she uses the poison, Gigant activates his I-beam, which causes a huge explosion, and Mothra eventually flies out fully flamed and kills Gigant that way. But I decided it didn't really work, so I just kept its ability Shield Dust, because the way I see it, Mothra and a lot of different interpretations, and most of them actually, is really divine. So she's one of the few kaiju that isn't actually radioactive. So I figured Shield Dust could be a good way in lore to go over Mothra, I guess you can say, being immune, or at least resisted the Godzilla's radiation. So that's Mothra. Next up, we have Fire Rodan. Not regular Rodan, because Fire Rodan is a very unique one in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. In that one, some researchers find an egg, which ends up being a Godzilla source. I forget the reasoning for why, but Rodan felt like a psychic link to the egg. So in the beginning of the film, Rodan and Godzilla actually fight each other. Godzilla chokes Rodan, causing him to bleed, and then fires his atomic breath. Everyone assumes Rodan is dead, but later on, Rodan arises, and I'm pretty sure he might have absorbed some of Godzilla's radiation, because after that, not only does his skin change from brown to red, but he also gains his own version of the atomic breath. It doesn't work too well for him, however, because while trying to search for baby Godzilla, he ends up being knocked down by Super Mechagodzilla. Super Mechagodzilla also destroys Godzilla's second brain, which is a whole can of worms I'm not gonna go over today. But it basically leaves Godzilla unconscious. Rodan tries to fly away, but Mechagodzilla shoots him and finishes him off. He goes to Godzilla, Godzilla absorbs Rodan's life force, and then kills Mechagodzilla. So there wasn't much to really go over for Rodan, unfortunately, because his traits are just for all of them, just basically big bird that can fly. So I gave him both Gust and Hurricane. Gust, I imagine, was more so for reference to Sheila Rodan, where he tried using wind power, but wasn't really that effective. And then Hurricane in reference to Monsterverse Rodan, where as he's flying, just his presence and the speed and velocity he is going, completely destroying so many, like, buildings in an instant. And Fly just because, yeah, it's Fly. I didn't want to give Dragon Pulse to Rodan, because even though he fires an atomic breath, technically it just didn't feel right. Especially since, unlike Godzilla, his ray was more so purpley white, if I remember correctly. But often Rodan is seen or described as like being a fire demon. That's definitely how he was depicted in Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019. As well as Fire Rodan, literally being called Fire Rodan. So I felt like just keeping Flamethrower was good enough. His level was 156, as reference to the year he came out, 1956. Now, here we have two Titans. These aren't Toho Kaiju, these are from Legendary. But these are the two ones that got, like, really boned in Godzilla X Kong New Empire. If you haven't seen that yet, spoiler alert, I guess. But I kind of already did a little bit of spoilers. Luckily, these two aren't really that important to the plot, especially in that Sheila once we get to her. So, it's not a big deal if you're planning on watching it. But we have a Huntail here, and she is named after Tiamat. Tiamat is one of my absolute favorites, and I'm so salty she got boned in the Legendary film. Now, Tiamat doesn't actually appear in any of the movies until the new one. Tiamat was more so a Titan for the comics, which are canon to the Monsterverse. After Godzilla killed King Ghidorah and became the new king of the monsters, he went around finding a few different Titans that were disturbing the order, while trying to find a new place to call his home. Because in Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019, in order to like help give him a supercharge so he can face King Ghidorah, they launched a nuke, but unfortunately that nuke was launched in the ancient sea temple that Godzilla used to like live in. They had to try to find a new place. He eventually goes to an old temple where he got kicked out by an older species of Kong. But instead of finding that, instead he found Tiamat. Tiamat ambushed Godzilla, put up one heck of a fight, managing to make him bleed as well as even blinding him. But eventually Godzilla got the upper hand once he brought Tiamat to the land, where Tiamat was forced to step down and retreated. After that, Tiamat went to the Arctic, where she spent years just absorbing, energy from solar flares. So in the events of Godzilla X Kong, the new empire, Godzilla needs more energy. So he first goes to a nuclear power plant, in France, absorbs all of the energy there, and then he goes directly to the North Pole. There he goes to Tiamat's base, fires an atomic breath, Tiamat shows up, they start a fight, and even though Tiamat managed to wrap herself around Godzilla and bit him, that unfortunately just sealed her fate, because that gave Godzilla the opportunity to use an atomic breath directly into her mouth, killing her instantly. And that's part of the reason why he supercharged himself, by the way, because Tiamat is legitimately a really dangerous Titan, and a really powerful one, as she was able to beat the living crap out of Godzilla on his own turf, underwater. So he kills Tiamat, and that's when he uses the time to observe all of the energy in her lair, which is when he eventually supercharges himself to face the people in Godzilla X Kong. I really don't like that she got boned so much, especially since the film has Kong finding a random ass sea serpent at one point in the movie. So like, you very easily could have cut that and doubled the amount of time Tiamat had. Instead of having a 5-minute battle, you could have a 10-minute one instead, and I don't think that would be anywhere near as bad. But that's besides the point. I think Huntail being used to represent Tiamat is pretty obvious, I would say. Already pretty long, blue, has some spikes on him. And I know the moveset seems really lame, but I swear Tiamat made it look a lot cooler in her comic in Godzilla Dominion. Wrap is pretty obvious, same with dive, since in the comic and even in the new film, Tiamat is really great in the water and can wrap herself around Godzilla. And the reason why Iron Barbs is on here is because basically Tiamat has a lot of spikes on her. So she coils around Godzilla, but then she kept them like moving really quickly so that the blades were cutting Godzilla like a saw. She also bites Godzilla, which is part of the reason why I gave Hunter a bite. And lastly is poison gas. I forget what it is exactly, but Tiamat did fire some sort of like yellowish green ooze or something which blinded Godzilla, which forced Godzilla to use his other senses. So he was having to fight Tiamat while basically using like his like heat perception, kind of like snakes, in order to fight Tiamat that way. So, unlike the others though, this one doesn't have any particular reason for the level, because Sheila, as we're about to go over, came out in the exact same film. And since it's a Huntail using, quite frankly, really pathetic moves, I kinda had no choice but to really buff their level, just so that she wouldn't get absolutely destroyed. The next up is Sheila, which is the kaiju, or the titan, that Godzilla fights in the very beginning of Godzilla x Kong. She also appears in Godzilla King of the Monsters, as one of the titans that, at the end of the movie, bows down to Godzilla. She is actually really cool, because she's basically the combination of a squid, a crab, and a spider. So she's really good and fast in the water, but she also has the ability to shoot webs, as well as use her tentacles to immobilize people. In Godzilla x Kong, at the very beginning, she fights Godzilla, and Godzilla kills her almost instantly. But luckily, there is a prequel comic to explain what she was doing. But before going over that, it's important to know that even though she bowed down to Godzilla in Godzilla King of the Monsters, she was not one of the ones that did it, like, willingly, more so begrudgingly. Because immediately after, along with Godzilla fighting Tiamat, in the same comic, Godzilla Dominion, Godzilla also fights Sheila. And basically, Sheila was about to eat a nuke, because it's the Monsterverse, all the monsters feed off radiation. But Godzilla was worried that it would mess up the atmosphere or the environment, so Godzilla and Tiamat fight over the nuke, during which Sheila actually manages to get some good hits in, manages to make Godzilla bleed, and even using her tentacles to sort of like mobilize Godzilla. But Godzilla quickly gets the upper hand, but unfortunately for Godzilla, since she is an aquatic creature, she manages to escape and like swim away. And in the other comic, the prequel, I forget what it's called, but basically there's one person who is like a Titan hunter, and he was having these fake power plants to distract Godzilla, while he makes a mecha for himself called the Titan Hunter. Godzilla ends up falling for most of them, but one of them woke up Sheila, and Sheila went over and basically destroyed the power plant and absorbed the radiation, and she goes around absorbing more radiation until she eventually goes to Rome, where she starts like putting some webs down. So it's theorized that there's two things Sheila was doing there in the comic. One was either trying to gain more power so that she can beat Godzilla, or her just trying to find a place to nest and lay eggs for her babies. Considering that she only laid some webs, and in Rome there wasn't actually anywhere to like power plants in sight, I think it's significantly more likely that she was trying to like find a place to lay her eggs for her babies. And that's part of the reason why Godzilla killed her. Not only because her and Tiamat have disobeyed Godzilla in the past, meaning Godzilla was not very tolerant of them, but just like the Mutos, Godzilla probably saw like them having offsprings as a big obstacle to the natural order, which is why Godzilla decided to kill her then and there. So, all that explained, I think using Araquanid just makes sense. Araquanid is already a big water spider, so it's almost exactly the same thing. And because of sticky web, that's the reason why I gave it sticky web. There's an order, the theory is that she's laying her webs to help with her babies. Lunge, because I couldn't think of anything better to, just have an attack where she's using her legs to impale somebody. And bind is supposed to be in reference to just her tentacles, with being able to wrap around something. And dive is to represent her being fast in the water. And that's the exact same reason why I gave her Swift Swim. Because the only reason she didn't die in Godzilla Dominion is because she actually managed to be even faster than Godzilla in the water. And her level is 119, as reference to the year she appeared in the movie, Godzilla King of the Monsters, 2019. And last but certainly not least, we have King Ghidorah, which we're going to use for Hydreigon, which obviously just made sense. Now, King Ghidorah is Godzilla's arch-rival, and most of the inspiration for Hydreigon came from the MonsterVerse one, because the MonsterVerse version of Ghidorah is my favorite personally. And in 2019, Ghidorah is awakened from an iceberg, fights Godzilla a lot, and the two of them basically had a rivalry for centuries. And MonsterVerse Ghidorah has some interesting abilities that others don't. Most versions of Ghidorah already have him destroying everything in sight just from the power of its winds alone. So just flying over Osaka destroys a whole bunch of buildings. But MonsterVerse Ghidorah is so powerful that he passively has a giant hurricane that's constantly following him around, which has a whole bunch of electricity and powerful winds. And he also has the ability to drain others when he bites them, just like Kaiju Ghidorah. As well as having the ability to, as long as there's radiation or electricity around, he can recover himself. In the film, at one point, Godzilla drags him underwater, literally rips off one of his heads, but luckily, after Godzilla was defeated by the Oxygen Destroyer, while he's surrounded in his storm and there's electricity and radiation everywhere, he manages to regrow one of his heads. So, this is why I gave the moveset that I do here. Starting off, he has the ability Electric Surge, which I think from the explanation I just gave, should be pretty obvious as to why. Ghidorah is just passively, having these storms that increase his electricity, which is why he has Thunderbolt. And technically speaking, it's not actually electricity Ghidorah fires. They're called gravity beams, which are much more dangerous. But it's the same thing, having Electric Surge and then having Thunderbolt be powered by that. Same with Hurricane. Even if we ignore the fact that he has a storm that was really so big in the movie, you see it covering all of Brazil. But also, just in general, he always has powerful wings that can cause huge storms and blow people away. So that's self-explanatory. Same thing with Recover. Well, you don't really get to see it for the match. By the way, I do have 4 replays I'll have to show you. But I was going under the instruction that Hydreigon can only use Recover when Electric Terrain is up. And then Bite just because Ghidorah just bite a lot. I'm considering maybe Leech Life or Draining Kiss, since technically when he bites things, he can drain their energy. But I felt like it just didn't really work aesthetically, having Hydreigon use Leech Life or Draining Kiss. Try to stay with Bite. If Hydreigon in particular, that also gave him the benefit of having Stab. So those were 6 Pokemon that I tried to Godzillify. Hydreigon here has the level 164, because he first appeared in the film Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster, which came out in 1964. I had a lot of fun theory crafting this. It's very, very different from my usual videos, but I had fun with it. And Zach and Theus and Cyber DJ, the 2 council members for Generation Jumble, I already know about this. So I had 4 replays where I battled Cyber. These were 2 Ubers battles and 2 OU battles. So for the first 2, I wasn't exactly sure how to do this. So many of the levels are going to be kind of different. But it was a lot of fun. Let me make sure I have the correct order though. I think I need to start here. I think I put them in the opposite order. This is going to be an Ubers battle. Or whatever. Let's just... actually think this is the first one. Oh, it's lagging very badly. Oh yeah, this one, yeah, definitely. So for starters, I started with 104, because I was worried that they were going to be a little bit too powerful, putting my level 154. So it doesn't really go that well. It takes 3 hits to kill, what's it called, Gomorrah. I already have to switch, but they already have Zacian out. Zacian goes for a Swords Dance, and what you're going to see next is just an absolute domination of, like, Zacian Sweep. Because even with the extra levels, many of these Pokemon just do not stand a chance against Zacian. Zacian still outspeeds and annihilates everything. It is fair to say, however, that I actually forgot half of these Pokemon didn't even have EVs at first. I just sort of assumed that their bulk alone from the extra levels would be enough to help them. That definitely was not the case. Not at all. So here you just see what I would call a certified Zacian sweep. But just know, this for the future, that if Godzilla ever did existed in the Pokemon universe, Zacian would just treat them like they're Dynamax. Not really, but like, I don't think you guys are ready for me to have a full-on, like, nerve fest going over why Godzilla would probably steal a Pokemon. Next up, we have an OU game. Doesn't really go that well at first. Luckily, I go for Bind, and Bind, funny enough, does somewhat decent damage. Because of Araquanid's naturally good special bulk and the extra levels, Moonblast doesn't really do anything. And one big problem that my team has is the fact that only one of them has an item, that being Baxcalibur. Because I think I forgot to mention that. But another thing for Baxcalibur is, the reason why he's the only one with leftovers is because Godzilla has a healing factor. All versions of Godzilla have the ability to regenerate, so that was really easy to do, give him leftovers. I didn't give Ghidorah leftovers because he can only regenerate when there's a radiation of electricity. It's not passive like with Godzilla. That's why he has Recover instead. Well, back to the rematch. Sheila here does a decent job, gets a Sticky Web up, but unfortunately this is Light Clay Deoxys Speed. Cyber DJ will actually manage to fully set up dual screens, which kind of just bones me for the rest of the match. Because it's already bad enough that I don't have any real moves, but now with dual screens up, Cyber DJ will have a lot of opportunities to set up with Gorging Fire, or Gouging Fire. It doesn't really go too well, and even with the extra levels that a lot of these Pokemon have, that's not going to mean much if Cyber DJ is really going like +6 or something. Also, this is like one of my first few times actually going against a Gouging Fire. I can definitely see why it's good, holy crap. Gouging Fire will eventually get a sweep, and it just annihilates everything. And the only real hope I have is for Confusion, because with this much attack, obviously it will just die. Even with 140 levels, that extra 40 is not enough. Tiamat gets outsped and gets killed. Fire Rodan doesn't do much better. I went for Hurricane, but unfortunately I think the next time the confusion ends. So once again, Fire Rodan gets absolutely destroyed there. Mothra doesn't do that much better. It still gets O-Code. Going into King Ghidorah and does not really help that much. This is when I realized I need to make some higher levels for these guys. So at first I just went with 104 as still a reference to 1954 and 1964. But obviously it didn't really help out that much. So I upped their levels some more, and ended up being much more balanced. Now starting off, I sort of learned my lesson from last time. So I just went straight for the kill, which luckily worked out very greatly. So they go in the Latios, and this Latios sets up with agility and store power, which is really annoying. So going for lunch doesn't really help that much. I take the opportunity to go for Bind and then Sticky Web. I figured that would do some decent damage. Too bad it's not like Gen 1 where you get trapped when you use this when using trapping move. Going for Sticky Web I imagine would help a lot. I switched into Venomoth. I go for Calm Mind. I was really tempted to go for Mirror Coat, but I was scared I was going to get killed. I regret not going for it because it would have worked, as you can see there. So now there's just not much I can really do. Going for Gust, but does practically nothing. Maybe should have gone for String Shot, who knows. It would have been so hype if I did go for Mirror Coat, but I was a coward, and I didn't trust the process, so that's on me. In comes King Ghidorah, who is immune to... what's it called? Immune to Psychic. And because of just how much bulk there is, being 64 levels higher than Latios, even with the massive special attack boost, Aura Spear still isn't doing that much, which means that Thunderbolt, even with all of the special defense, is enough to kill Latios. So King Ghidorah actually managed to hold its own. And this is where I figured maybe it would be fine to go against Uber's Pokemon again. And Namorous gets the kill, just as the electric terrain goes out, blowing the Excalibur, aka Godzilla. Unfortunately for the Hatterene, I went for Strength, and Strength does a lot of damage, and with Toxic Chain, the radiation poisons Hatterene, and unfortunately Magic Bounce would not be able to protect herself from Godzilla's radiation poisoning, as even other magical people, or people with high resistance, still end up being poisoned by Godzilla. And comes the Gorging Fire, but unfortunately gets absolutely destroyed by the Atomic Breath. I switch into Hunto here. Earth Power doesn't really do that much, so it's actually really easy for me to, or at least try to go for Poison Gas. Doesn't really work out. So instead, I just go for Dive, and Dive will do pretty good damage. With a crit, I've actually forgot a crit. The crit isn't up to Oko. I know for a fact that Iron Barbs is going to do decent damage to King Gambit here. I just went for a Bite. I break the Air Balloon. They go for another Sword Stance. I go for a Wrap. I was just going to try to go for Dive here. This might as well. Sucker Punch kills Tiamat, but not before taking a lot of damage in. Moltres is out here. Moltres gets killed. Sheila doesn't really do that much. So all that's left is Godzilla. But luckily, even with how much damage King Gambit does, because of just how tanky Godzilla is, he can survive, drags King Gambit into the water where he cannot do much against Godzilla. So Godzilla wins. One last match, and it's another Ubers. We have Gamora again, but this time, now that Godzilla's at level 154, it does tremendously more damage, enough to where it can two-shot Gamora. So, Godzilla ends up being fine. It's forced to switch out from Kyurem Black. And this is unfortunate where everything starts to go apart. Because Kyurem, I forgot, got Dragon Dance. That's actually really huge. I went for Sticky Web. They go Terra Electric, go for Fusion Bolt. It's more than enough to kill. Already I'm in a big pickle. Mothra comes in trying to go for a String Shot, but does not really do that much. Kyurem manages to kill. I imagine it probably has loaded dice. There's Moltres, but Kyurem just outspeeds and kills Fire Rodan. In comes Godzilla. This is where I panicked. I didn't know how much damage it would do, so I went for Explosion, which definitely kills, but at what cost? Godzilla managed to tank that pretty easily. So I actually imagine with Strength, or more likely Dragon Pulse, I could have killed it easily. But Bite, unfortunately, does not get a flinch, so they go for a Trick Room. I switch into Tiamat. They go for Glacial Lance. Doesn't really do that much. They go for High Horsepower. Doesn't kill. Tiamat goes underwater, just burning a turn of Trick Room. So that gets taken out. In comes Arceus Ground. But Tiamat actually goes first. Even with the speed drop, it's still faster than Huntail. Arceus gets O-Code by Dive. Or barely doesn't get O-Code. Oh no, yeah, barely doesn't get O-Code, but it doesn't matter. Arceus survives, but then gets killed by Bite. In comes Koraidon. Even with the speed drop, Koraidon is faster. So Tiamat goes for Poison Gas, blinding Koraidon, but Koraidon can still move past it anyways. And with that neutral speed stat, it's not looking too good. In comes King Ghidorah, but King Ghidorah unfortunately does not have a dragon move. In fact, everything's actually kind of resisted. But doesn't even matter, because even with 64 levels ahead, and with no speed boost, Koraidon was still able to outspeed and kill. So that game definitely was winnable. I feel like if I just went for Dragon Pulse instead of Explosion, instead of panicking, I could have won that easily. But that's besides the point, because that was just to have some fun and just to have some fun theory crafting. Wasn't really focused on a good metagame or making sure the Pokemon were actually good. I just wanted 6 Pokemon that would really perfectly go over what the characters in Godzilla are really like, and just have some accurate references. And I feel like I did a pretty good job with that. What do you think? This is a very different video than I usually do. Would you like to see more of these? And did you have fun just seeing me mostly just nerd out about Godzilla? Let me know in the comments below, because if you guys would like to see more Godzilla videos, I definitely would love to make them. And I have a playlist where I've made some older videos in the past about Godzilla. Check those out if you want. But until next time, this is Groundback, and I look forward to hearing from you.